I want to say, again, first and foremost, thank you to Shahida Lacey, who in our office actually have put together this series for the entire month regarding Black mental health. And a big thank you to you, because it wouldn't happen without your hard work and dedication in this regard. I'd like to say good evening to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us to this important discussion about Black mental health during Mental Health Month. We'll have a panel discussion and then an opportunity for our participants to ask questions as well. So this will be an interactive session, as has been the entire month of May. My name is Keith Carson, and I'm very proud and to have the privilege of representing District 5 on the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, which is the cities of Albany, Berkeley, Piedmont, Emeryville, West Oakland, North Oakland, Montclair, San Antonio areas, about a third of Oakland. So I want to say it's been a privilege to be the representative on the county, of which mental health is one of the areas that the county oversees, and counties across this country, the 3,300 counties across this country oversees the health and safety and welfare of the citizens that live in their regional areas. Counties in California are the mental health safety net and are responsible for serving not only the severely mentally ill, but also those having responsibility to invest in prevention and early intervention programs through Mental Health Service Act. And that's one of the things we want to talk about is intervention and prevention, and make sure that people don't just find themselves surrounded by 5150 calls and being in a place that's very unfamiliar to them and unhealthy, but we want to involve ourselves in prevention and intervention, as well as making sure that we have strong organizational structures to support people. So as I said, tonight is a part of our month-long series on various mental health topics that affect the African-American community. This series is in partnership with the Alameda County Behavioral Health and our community partners. And I'd like to say that our very first part of the series that was kicked off for Mental Health Month was by our own Executive Director of Behavioral Care for Alameda County. And I want to say a big thank you to her for her involvement. This week, we're focusing on parents and adolescent children and how to manage and support parents and adolescent children. I'm going to ask that Shahida introduce our panelists, because she did all the hard work putting the panel together. But just before I hand it off to her, I'm so excited to have tonight's panelists, as well as all of the panelists that have participated up to this point. But a big help in identifying and helping us think this through has been Neisha Becton. And I really want to say, and she's going to be one of our panelists tonight. She hasn't been on the panels before, and just want to say thank you so much for all of the counsel you've given me in our office around putting together this important series on Black African-American mental health, but all of the work that you've been doing in the county, and along with your peers and colleagues that provide support in emotional health, traumatic health, and mental health. And I just want to say a big thank you. And I do want to say a thank you to all of the panelists who are probably really stretched these days in trying to, and people asking for help and guidance and some sense of direction during what has been, especially the last 14, 15 months, a very scary time for many, a time that none of us have ever experienced in our life, and we're not completely out of it yet. The entire world has been going through this, and as we reflect on how this has impacted all of us, we're still very fortunate in the United States, where underdeveloped and developing countries have yet to get the vaccine dealing with COVID in their countries, and the death rates are still going up as opposed to stabilizing and coming down. People are still told to stay in place. All of these things that have added stress and uncertainty and emotional impacts to us on top of our daily lives that we experience, especially as African Americans, even before the pandemic. So again, thank you for tuning in. Get your questions together. Got an incredible panel, and I want to thank all of our panelists, including those on the East Coast who are participating in tonight's discussion. And with that, again, a big thanks to Shahida Lacey, and I'll turn it over to you to introduce our panelists and let people know to get their questions ready so that they can engage in a dialogue and a conversation after the panel cue.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. So we're going to allow the moderator, Neisha, to introduce herself, and then we will we'll have all the panelists introduce themselves. So we'll start with Neisha.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Neisha Becton, and I am the CEO and founder of Pathways to Wellness Medication Clinics. I'm located in Alameda County, Oakland, Union City, and in Pleasanton. I'm happy to be here this evening. I'm also the lead for our African American Technical Assistance and Training Program, which is also through Alameda County Behavioral Health. And we're happy to be here this evening. We have a lot of folks probably tuning in, and I'm hoping that this event is wonderful and brings a lot of information to the community and to the general public. You guys have a great lineup this evening, so I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
And Rosa.
Good evening. My name is Rosa Warder. I'm the manager for the Office of Family Empowerment for Alameda County Behavioral Health Care Services. I'm also a parent and a grandparent, and I have children and grandchildren in my life that have utilized services in Alameda County, which made me leave my job in epidemiology and come over to behavioral health care to start the Family Partnership Program in Children's Services a little over 20 years ago, and then move on after the MHSA was passed with Prop 63, moved over and took over the beginnings of the Office of Family Empowerment. And I'm very happy to be here to discuss children's mental health, adolescents' mental health, and the important roles that family members portray in navigating the system, learning about child development, and supporting their families and loved ones. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll have Dr. Salaam.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Karriem Salaam. I'm a board certified adult and child and adolescent psychiatrist. I practice in the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, known as Philadelphia. And I'm also representing the African American Technical Training and Assistance Program that's part of Pathways to Wellness. It's an absolute delight to be here virtually from the East Coast to discuss some of these issues as they apply to child and adolescent mental health. Additionally, I'm a founding member of Global Health Psychiatry. We publish mental health literature that's largely focused on the African American community to elevate and uplift our community and increase mental health awareness so that folks can be better consumers and advocates for themselves and their loved ones as it applies to mental health. Thank you so much. Thank you, Supervisor Carson, and everyone involved in this meaningful discussion in these series of discussions.
And then last but not least, we have Tanya.
Good evening, everyone. I am Tanya McCullom, and I also work for Alameda County Behavioral Health Care in the Office of Family Empowerment. I am a family member of now an adult. However, the way I got into this work is my adult son was in middle school and high school and was showing signs of mental health. And I, as a parent, didn't understand that it was mental health that I was looking at. I was focusing on behavior, and so was the school. And as a result, he was expelled, suspended, all that you can think of was what had happened to him until I learned what was going on with him and learned how to advocate. And from there, I became a family partner. That was over 17 years ago. And now I work within the Office of Family Empowerment as a family member within Alameda County Behavioral Health as a program specialist.
Thank you. So tonight's topic is on parents with adolescent children and focused on their providing services and mental health services for the parents and children who may experience mental health problems. Neisha, you can take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're going to start. We have a number of questions, and I just want to make sure that I put out there to everyone, if you have questions along the way, please don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A, and we'll make sure we get through those questions. We're going to get through the list of questions we have and make sure that we leave some time at the end for questions and answers. So we're going to start with the first question here, and I'll start with Ms. Rosa, if you're okay with that. What do you see as mental illness? What's your definition? We have a lot of viewers on. This is our third series this evening. And so I like to always start with that question because a lot of new people are joining us and they just want to get an idea of what that looks like.
Well, it's actually a term I rarely use.
Okay.
I look at mental unwellness, emotional unwellness, especially when we're talking about children. It's social emotional issues that might be impeding their lives in their home, in their school, which is why I think it's so critical for people to be aware that mental illness can be used in a very stigmatizing way. People don't have, they are not their diagnoses. People will often say jokingly, oh, she's so bipolar, or he's feeling so schizophrenic, or that kind of thing. And I always move to correct them and say, no, this person might be living with bipolar disorder. This person might be living with schizophrenia, but they are who they are first. And the kinds of challenges that they're experiencing can be managed. And we as a society and as a community need to support all of our loved ones, all of our people out there. Because for us, this starts in early childhood for many of our folks. Many of our folks that are currently imprisoned are African-American men who started that journey in the preschool to prison pipeline because their behaviors literally got them thrown out of school at the ages of 2, 3, 4, and 5. So it's really critical that we focus on what's working for Black children and Black families. And that is not always what's part of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that gives diagnostic codes for people based on their behaviors. It's really important to know the history of mental health and how it was established really as part of a way to control Black bodies. The term of drapetomania, which literally meant that you were mentally ill because you had left the plantation, you were wandering. That was considered a mental illness. So we really need to be aware of the history of mental illness and how it's been defined in our society, and be aware of how that impacts Black communities.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Rosa. How about you, Dr. Salaam?
So that was an excellent response, Ms. Warder. And just to repeat the question again, what is mental illness? Yes. So I use the term mental illness, and it's not too complicated. It typically refers to any impairment involving the brain or the mind. The brain is part of the central nervous system. The other part is the spinal cord. But these disorders tend to interfere with human beings' ability to function, whether it's thinking, problem solving, interpersonal relationships, or just having emotional manifestations. So that is kind of my working definition of mental illness. There's not been a standardized definition. However, I think a central feature is the impairment in one's ability to function, particularly in social spheres, interpersonal spheres, educational and vocational spheres. And when you're mentally unwell, that ability is impaired, and it affects your relationships. It affects your ability to make a living or to get on the pathway to make a living, whether it's through educational and vocational training. And then finally, it influences behavior and how one conducts oneself and interacts with others in society. So, but these mental health disorders tend to be very treatable, not curable, but very treatable. And an important aspect of addressing mental health issues in communities of color are some of the workforce challenges we're facing. And the literature is kind of replete with examples of how, especially in a medical model, consumers of medical treatment tend to follow the provider's recommendations when those providers share a similar background. And some of the seminal work done in this regard was actually in the Bay Area. A close friend of mine was one of the lead researchers, Dr. Owen Garrett, in this particular group that focused on African-American men in a primary care setting and their response to primary care recommendations made by African-American physicians versus those who were from other demographics.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Salaam. How about you, Tanya? What would your answer be in terms of what is mental illness?
Yes, you know, as a parent, the first time that I heard that phrase used in correlation to my son, I immediately thought that someone was telling me that my son was crazy. And that was how I viewed mental illness, the phrase mental illness. And as I went along my journey in trying to figure out what was really going on with my son, I realized that it did have something to do with the brain, and that mental illness really didn't work for me. It didn't really describe what was happening with my son. And I had to learn that what was going on with my son was that there was, you know, his brain had been altered in some way due, you know, biological trauma, you know, whatever it is that impacted his life had altered his brain. And as a result, it altered his behavior. And so I would, you know, if I were to just, you know, use a word to describe mental illness, it will probably be, you know, that it has to do with the brain. I hate to use the word disorder because, you know, my son, you know, he thinks differently than other people. Let's put it that way. You know, he doesn't see it as a disorder, and neither do I. You know, when in order for him to receive services in school, he had to be labeled as seriously emotionally disturbed. Mm-hmm. And I had an issue with that, but that was the only way I could get services for him, was to put that label on him. And so I feel that these words are very negative, and especially for a young Black boy in school and young men, Black men, once they get that label, it follows them for the rest of their lives. And regardless of how they manage their lives, they are still, you know, stuck with that label. And so I do not use that word either, or that phrase, when I speak about any child or even an adult. You know, I see it as, you know, having social and emotional challenges, having behavioral health challenges. Those are the phrases that I use when I in place of mental illness.
Okay. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you. And this next question actually goes along nicely. What are some ways that young children exhibit, and we can say adolescents too, if you'd like, what are some ways that young children or adolescents exhibit mental unwellness compared to adults? From your lens, Rosa.
Well, it certainly differs, you know, with children. Often it starts with simple things like irregular sleep patterns, not being able to quiet and settle themselves well, not being able to necessarily interact socially in playgrounds, play groups, in a way that works with other children of their same age. It can also show up as angry outbursts, both in young children all the way up through adolescents and young adults. There are children that bang their heads in frustration and cause, you know, possible other problems because of repeated head banging. There are children that refuse to speak. They just choose it. They can't communicate with the world anymore at present. It's just too painful. There's many ways that it shows up. But as a parent, I think the thing that really shows up is in your gut when you see what's going on with your child and how they're interacting and how children and other people of the community are interacting with them. And you see that it's not quite right, it's not lining up. You know that there's something going on and that you need to start to figure out what is happening with your child and what are the things that might help alleviate some of the stressors that they're showing through their behavior.
Very good. Very good. And I'm going to pass that question on to you as well, Dr. Salaam. What are some ways that young children or adolescents exhibit mental unwellness compared to adults? Being a child psychiatrist, you might be able to share with us some things that you've seen along the way and maybe versus what you've studied.
Sure. So typically when you're looking at younger children, just look at it this way. The younger children who are in our personal lives, we tend to have to adapt to their behavioral difficulties. And the younger they are, they're largely limited to the home. But they tend to face more difficulties when they're around other kids. And the adults who are supervising these groups of kids are kind of teaching towards the average, towards the middle. And the further you deviate from that in terms of your behavior, it's going to stand out, and it's going to kind of bring unnecessary attention or extra attention to this particular youngster. And then the younger children they communicate more through their behavior than their words. And so they may act out more and express themselves through physicality. Ms. Warder mentioned folks who are having tantrums, who are acting out. She talked about self-injurious behavior. And for example, you could have a youngster who's depressed and they may not exhibit sadness and the blues, and it may present more commonly as anger and irritability. Mm-hmm. Another thing you look for are, especially in younger children, so they've hit developmental targets, mastered toileting, speaking in full sentences. So if you notice a sharp decrease or a regression or a return to an earlier stage of development or an earlier behaviors, so baby talk, becoming more clingy, bedwetting, those are really indicators that there is a problem. Now, when you love a child, there's a tendency for folks, when you love a child, to really amplify their strengths. You know, they're funny, they're pretty, they're handsome, they're so smart. And then their shortcomings, their challenges, their deficits, some folks want to hope and pray them away. And that's a mistake, because those deficits, those challenges will become more and more problematic. And then they'll find themselves in an environment that's far less tolerant of those behavioral differences. And you have to resist the tendency to second guess your intellect. So you know this kid, you're an expert in this kid, and you know something's not right. And it's really important to kind of interrogate that earlier on. While I have the mic, I want to speak to an earlier point. It was something I had to learn as a professional. All kids have strengths that must be amplified. So much of our training is in a deficit-based model because that's what the payers are looking at in these labels. But it was actually a third-party payer, managed Medicaid in Philadelphia County, called Community Behavioral Health. They commended me on the quality of my psychiatric evaluations, but they insisted that they be more strength-based. And so, again, as a mental health professional, it's my job to mine for a youngster's underlying strengths. It may be that they're really cute. They are very enthusiastic. They're very social, but we all have strengths. They've mastered their activities of daily living. So it's incumbent upon all of us to mine for any young person's strength. They all have them.
Very good. Very good. How about you, Tanya? I see you nodding there. How about the same question? What are some ways that young children or adolescents exhibit mental unwellness compared to adults from your experience?
So I want to speak specifically about trauma because that is something that I had some personal experience in, as well as have seen how trauma plays out in children and young children. Specifically, my child, when he was, around 7 or 8, he started having these vivid nightmares and terrors, which I had no idea at that point had anything to do with trauma. And they were recurring nightmares, and they lasted well into his teen years. And, as a young child, he would tell me, what his dreams were, but I had no idea what that meant, and then as he got older, he just hid the fact that he was still having these dreams. Another way that I noticed that children will act out, especially when it comes to trauma, is that they will become what the industry calls dysregulated, like they're not able to control their emotions or control their body even. Their body is dysregulated. I spoke with a mother recently whose now adult child was born with a congenital heart defect and had, like 5 or 6 surgeries before the age of 5 or something crazy like that, and had her first surgery as a newborn. And no one talked about trauma to this infant's body and how it played out later on in her life with her anxiety and the anger that she exhibited when she was in school, that it was all related to the trauma that she experienced with all the different surgeries that she had, at a very, very young age. And so oftentimes children they're not able, like, as an infant, you can't say that you're in pain or that you're afraid or whatever, you feel when you're up against something really challenging, but your body still holds that, that trauma. And so oftentimes children will act out with their bodies, or they will sit quietly in a corner. And because they're sitting quietly in a corner, then nothing's wrong, that this child is not a problem because they're not acting out. And so they end up, being passed on, or they're seen as the shy child, and they're just being passed on in school. And then all of a sudden, at the age of 17, 18, 19, 20, when they go to college, they may have their first psychotic episode. And then when the parents look back, they realize, like, wow, this child has been exhibiting certain behaviors all along, but because they weren't a problem in school, they didn't act out at home or in the community, nobody paid attention. So it could be a wide range of things with children. It's, really, it's incumbent on the parents to be aware, to be educated. I remember my stepdaughter used to say she was bored all the time. I'm bored. And I didn't find out till later that what she was saying about being bored was a symptom of depression. And so, and also of trauma. And so, these are things that I learned later in life as I started working in the mental health field, that there were so many things that I should have questioned, or I could have questioned, or could have asked, looked for ways to support my children so that they could get the support that they needed. But because, I hear a benign word like I'm bored. Well, I'll give you something to do if you're bored, that those are the things that I would say as a parent, or, the nightmares, oh, that it's okay. It wasn't real. The nightmares weren't real, and so you move on. And then later on, it shows in very, sometimes upsetting ways, and can be extremely disruptive to the individual's life, especially if they go to self-injury to release the pain, or other things that they do to manage their challenges.
Very good. Very good. And I have questions, but I'm going to skip and ask one from the Q&A and then head back to the other questions. That way we keep it very engaging and keep everybody involved. There was a question that came up, and I believe Dr. Salaam may have typed up an answer here, but if not, I'm gonna ask you to answer it. How do you know when your teenagers are depressed or out or being a teenager and having an attitude? How do you decipher what's going on? Do you have any tips for that? We have a person in the audience who's asked that question.
So I think I just answered it. I just typed an answer, but you want to look at functional impairment in a number of settings. So let's say if it's whether it's, the church, the synagogue, the masjid, the baseball field, school, everyone's not lying on your child and everyone's not out to get your child. And if you're hearing a chorus of individuals who are pointing out behaviors, then it's probably worth exploring. Now, it's common for teenagers to have attitudes, okay? Some of us may not admit it, but we were all teenagers and perhaps we had them. They shouldn't be pathologized. They shouldn't be labeled as a disorder, especially if they're able to get their things done. School's working out, all their friends aren't avoiding them and leaving them. They're still despite their attitude. And sometimes teenagers have fluctuations in mood. So they could be moody in the morning and they can be your bundle of sunshine in the afternoon. Why don't you just check in with them? Hey, what's going on? You never know. Maybe they were texting someone, they got some highly dramatic news. But again, functional impairment in a number of different settings. And then when you're hearing from adults in these different settings and they're like, hey, is this worth looking into? Again, that's when it's time to get help and not ignore the problem.
Okay, thank you. Rosa or Tanya, did you want to add to that, or are you in agreement with that?
I feel like that was beautifully answered. There's nothing for me to add.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well,
I do want to say I appreciate what you said, Dr. Salaam, that you really do need to listen to your children and ask questions, and don't just take, teenagers especially will give you the one-word answer. They'll shrug their shoulders. I had to get really creative and getting information out of my son, and just asking, just going a little bit deeper, and recognizing what's normal teenage behavior and what's over the top behavior. There's threatening to kill yourself is over the top behavior, even if it wasn't a real threat, even if they were just using it to manipulate you to get what they want. That's not normal behavior, and should not be treated as normal behavior. And so, and teenagers, can be dramatic like that, but, what is considered a normal teenager, they may stomp off, go to their room, slam their door, turn their music up loud so they don't have to listen to you. But when a teenager says, you know what, I want to kill myself because you won't let me go to a party or something like that, then that's time to be concerned.
Actually, this might be a good time to ask the question to all three of you, and feel free, either of you, to jump in. If you're a parent and you have a child or adolescent that's coming across with that type of behavior, what kind of questions should you ask? What's appropriate? Can you give us a few tips for that the parents can walk away with, even if it's a few questions? What are some things that you want to go too far, but you want to make sure you're in alignment and you understand, you do a check there, a reality check to see what's going on?
I'll go for that one.
Okay.
In my day job, I run a locked acute inpatient unit. So, and kids are there for one of three reasons: imminent, immediate danger to self, imminent, immediate danger to others, or they're gravely impaired and they may be out of touch with reality for a number of reasons, more commonly referred to as psychosis. So I think Ms. McCullom, she hit the nail on the head. It is not normal for a kid to talk about ending their life. And so the first thing is drop what you're doing and shift your attention to that young person, okay? And then if if you suspect, because you're very intelligent, you're an expert in this youngster, you know, what's happening here? Okay, you have my attention now. So you want to interrogate whether or not they're trying to hold you hostage emotionally, and just remind them of your duty and obligation to keep them safe. And so, you know, if this is manipulative behavior, that's a choice. And so I'm fully committed to keeping you safe. And that may, you know, make your life very inconvenient. So let's be clear. If there's something else going on, let's talk about it. But, you know, let's not deal in these threats. Now, the best predictor of current and future behavior is past behavior. And what you're really looking for are acts of furtherance. So a kid saying, oh, I want to kill myself, I wish I was dead. They don't have to be hospitalized, okay? There's a verbal threat, there's no act of furtherance, okay? But it becomes more serious if a youngster made an attempt, okay? However, there's a difference between non-suicidal self-injury, NSSI, and a suicide attempt. So there are more kids than there should be who cut themselves, and those kids do not need to be hospitalized, okay? Now, any attempt that results in an injury that requires medical treatment is serious. And that's when you have to think in terms of, you know, possibly containing someone. But you really want to find out, is this, you know, some type of manipulation, or is this really how you're feeling? And then you start talking about, well, you know, and you ask open-ended questions. So, you know, how are you going to come about this? Well, you know, do you have a plan or anything like that? And if a kid is being manipulative, typically they haven't thought it through and they don't have that level of detail. Here's another thing, and I'm going to say this to the audience. It's very important. When safety trumps everything. And so when that's at risk, you can't take chances. Confidentiality goes out the window. Okay, if there's ever a concern about safety, then if the diary's available, the devices are available, those things have to be investigated, because the stakes are too high and you don't want to miss. And then the final big myth is not having the conversation. So when you choose to ignore it, you're setting yourself up to miss. And remember, when you miss, all those fantasies you had for the young person in your life, that's gone, okay? So the narcissistic investment we have in the young people in our lives, look at it that way. When you miss, those are the things you miss. So it's worth temporary inconvenience and unhappiness to really explore when you think a young person is unsafe.
Excellent. Excellent. Rosa or Tanya, did you want to add on to that before I move to the next question? Please feel free.
I just feel it was a very good answer. And I also just feel that it's really important to ask questions that really show that you're interested in what's going on with them. And that takes some creativity, that takes some patience. I know for one of my children, the best conversations we had was when I was driving around getting them here or there, because it wasn't a face-to-face, you know, sit down. It allowed a little bit of distance so that we could have more probing conversations. Another one was really into, you know, the yo-yo scenes. We would yo-yo and talk. Finding out where your child is comfortable talking with you and how they're comfortable talking with you. And, you know, and asking them, and, you know, what's going on with you? How did that make you feel versus what's wrong with you? Because that brings up the defenses immediately. So really, you know, looking at, some people say this, and it sounds strange for a parent, but sometimes you have to treat your child like you're not their parent when you know that they're in danger, but you are or on that edge. You have to sort of treat them how you would treat your nephew or your niece, that kind of little bit of separation where you can be a little warmer, a little less invested for a moment just to get to the bottom of what you need to get to. And I'm constantly reassuring them that their safety is the utmost importance, but that that your love for them is unwavering. And it's important that those questions come across in a very loving manner.
Excellent. Excellent.
I absolutely agree with Rosa. And I was going to say that I love you goes a long way when they're having a hard time. Also, validating their feelings, because their feelings are very real. And just, making sure that they know that you understand that they're in pain, even if it's emotional pain. And definitely, taking the time to really listen. I think that that's something that I learned a lot, is take the time to really, really listen to what they're saying, whether it's being said to me, or as the young people used to say, I don't know what they say now, but doing that ear hustle when they're on the phone. They text now. So, but when my son was growing up, he was on the phone, so I could ear hustle. But just really, really pay attention. Like you're saying, looking at diaries and things like that. That you just, I would just go through my son's room because I was concerned about his safety, and I would let him know, I'm concerned about your safety because I love you. And I want what's best for you. And I want you to accomplish your dreams. I talked a lot about what he wanted to do with his life. Where did he want to go? And what can I do to support him in that?
Thank you. I'm going to go to the next question, which is good. And some of our folks in the audience have asked a little bit around these questions. So what are ways that parents can talk about current events without making their child feel fearful or, start to develop more anxiety around what's going on? And I think specifically we can talk about, we're in a pandemic, we have COVID-19, there's trauma and stress and racism and all of this stuff that's going on, white supremacy. Like, what are ways parents can actually talk to their children in this day and age with everything that's going on? It's a lot going on. They don't want to push them too far, but they want to have a discussion. So I want to start with you, Dr. Salaam. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. Listen, these are very, very fraught conversations, and they're tough for everyone. Let me just give just a really quick anecdote on the insurrection that happened January 6th. I was asked to do a media spot on how you talk to your children about that event. Literally, this was like maybe the evening of January 6th or January 7th or 8th. It was like right when it happened. And then, but they, a point was made, you can't be political. And so I said, well, any way that I spin it, it will appear political. But I said, this is criminal activity. And so if I can't describe it as such, then I can't do it. So I ended up not doing that, right? Number one, I don't think the world is any less certain or any more dangerous than it was, generations ago. It's just now we're fully aware of all the dangers, right? So there's a role for turning it off, right? Turn it off. And then you should ask your kids what they think about it. What do you think about it? And guess what? You may not get a full sentence, especially if it's a boy. But there's the check-in. Then what you could do to give them an invitation to have a deeper discussion is offer some of your feelings and make yourself vulnerable. And then, maybe they'll say, well, shucks, mom, pop, aunt, uncle, whomever, they feel some type of way about this. Maybe it's okay. It's like you've given them permission. But one, turn it off, slow it down. We're getting too much negative information. And the other thing too, you want to reassure them that though we live in an uncertain world and there are many factors that I can't even control, my investment in your safety and well-being is unwavering. I'm never going to quit on that. The reason why it's important to take a break from this unstoppable tide of negative information is you need an opportunity to reset, and you don't want these youngsters getting hopeless and cynical, and especially these young brothers feeling they have a sense of a foreshortened future. So give it a break, invite them to have the conversation, make yourself vulnerable, and that invites them to be more vulnerable.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Salaam. How about you, Rosa? Same question. What are some ways parents can talk about current events without making their children fearful of, or, you know, experiencing full-blown anxiety over it, because it's so much. It is so much.
Well, I totally agree, turning it off. And I particularly think this is important and people forget about it with young children. People often have the news just going on in the background, and the news can be anxiety producing and traumatizing these days. So just being aware of what's going on in your home, what kind of information people are getting. And I totally agree, like talking about how this makes you feel is important as a parent, as an adult in a child's life. Doesn't have to just be the parents, any adult in the child's life, you know, being willing to talk about what they're feeling and what they do to help that feeling. So, you know, I have grandchildren that are close by, teenagers, young teenagers, and we talk about all kinds of things. And one of the things that has made it work for us is I'll talk to them about how I feel, and I'll use words like, you know, sometimes I feel like there's just too much in my head. Sometimes I feel like, you know, so worried that my heart's pounding. I don't pathologize how I'm feeling, but I then talk about, so then I go and take a long walk and I look at everybody's garden, or maybe I'll drive down to the water. You know, we live in the Bay Area, you know, it's not hard to get out and walk along the water. That always makes me feel so much better. I usually see a friendly dog I can pet, you know, just kind of sharing my own coping mechanisms, whether that be, you know, meditation, whether that be prayer, whether that be dance. And I've also taught the scream. You know, sometimes you just need to scream. A good pillow is a good place to scream. Sometimes you just need to get that feeling out, and especially for wiggly boys who right now aren't being able to play sports the way they want to, or even my granddaughter who's on a swim team that has not swam for a year and a half. You know, everybody's bodies are not getting the kind of let out that we normally would get. So, you know, talking about ways to get that feeling out of you is a really excellent process. One of my grandsons had a teacher in 5th grade who I thought was just so brilliant. Whole line of 5th graders, as soon as the morning assembly was up, it didn't matter what kind of weather it was. They all had to keep extra clothes in their class because she would do this no matter what. She would go out on the field with them, and for 20 minutes, they would do this combination of stretching and calisthenics together, including yelling out, you know, in between, and doing kind of karate sounds, and then high-fiving each other before they went in to sit down and do anything. And so sometimes with kids, to be able to get them to a point, and this includes teenagers, where they can talk, where they can hear you, we got to take a check in. How are you doing physically? Do we need to like spend some energy somewhere? Do we need, you know, do you want to help me in the kitchen? That's a great place to talk. You know, do you want to help me wash the car? That's a great place to talk. You know, I'll do a Lego thing, whatever it takes, looking at what interests them, what makes them feel good, and just joining in. And you'll often find that you feel better too, because you've joined in and met that child where they're at. And that really helps the conversation flow.
Thank you, Rosa. These are things we can do tonight, tomorrow. So I really like it. It's practical. We can make it happen. How about you, Tanya?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. All of those things, absolutely. And play to your child's strengths. You know, what is it that they enjoy doing? And being honest about your own feelings, and making sure that they understand that, you know, the feelings are real, they're not wrong.
Mhm,
It just is. It's a normal reaction to everything that's going on.
mhm.
One thing I'd like to add too is, you should talk to the youngster and think about, well, what can we do to help solve this problem? Well, even if it's a small thing. So, so many parents of Black youth are, worried about the talk and when you get pulled over by the police and So let's role play,
Yeah.
right? That is your weapon. Let's arm you with information. Or if you see if there's an issue that you're passionate about, there are protests, there are marches, let's do something, right? Let's think about what we can do, not what you can't do, because none of us are hapless victims here. What can you do? And then again, you feel that sense of accomplishment. You've done your part, right? You didn't just sit by, you weren't just a passive bystander. So it's just problem solving.
That's right. Thank you. And actually moving to the next question, which I think is very good, because we're going to see a lot of this. With schools being closed, many kids have been with their parents for over a year now with distant learning, or even working from home, for that matter. But now with schools opening back up, what are some ways that we can help students with anxiety about going back to school? And how can we also address any learning challenges that may arise? Or probably in a lot of cases, from what we've been reading now and learning, a lot of kids are struggling, especially a lot of our little African-American kids. I know my son struggled with online school and college, his last year in college. So, and then he has to do it all online. And so I want to put that question out to the group, because I think so many of us are going through that, with our young kids or young adults that are in college. How about you, Dr. Salaam?
Sure. Listen, I'm a believer in the reframe. So it's framed as a negative, right? Because we've fallen into this habit of the distance learning, but just say, hey, you've leveraged technology for the past year and your FaceTime and Zooms. Now you get to see your guys or your girls, you get to see your people in person, and you get to socialize again. And that's critically important. As a younger parent, I was kind of, everyone's focused on study, blah, blah, blah. That social piece is really, really important. So they get that back again. And, pre-COVID, that was life, that was habit. So it's an opportunity to kind of restore that habit, rejuvenate those relationships, and look at it that way. So, maybe there's a little more accountability academically face to face, but, you're out of the house, you could have your private teenage conversations, or you could be away from the annoying adults and kind of fortify those bonds again. So I like the reframe, look at the positives.
Okay, all right. I like that reframe. How about you, Rosa? What would you say?
I like that. I do like the reframe. And I also, I can't stress enough the fact that just as we wean ourselves away from being on distant learning, online learning, there's actually going to be some weaning to do. We're all used to being on screens so much. There's a whole issue around that. And so I think it's going to be important that we are kind to each other and to our children about this process being new and different, that some of them may be frightened about going back in. Some will be frightened about, if they already had difficulty socializing, this has not been an easy time. So I think we support them, emphasize the positive, emphasize, what accomplishments they have made. But I also have to say that here in Alameda County, I am fully aware that the digital divide has had a huge impact in our Black and Brown communities. The assumption that children are home with us learning is a big assumption. Many children are home alone. Many of them are sharing a device. and don't have the opportunity to even have their own device to work with their own teacher per grade. We are going to have a lot of children coming back to school that basically have missed the last 16, 17 months of school. And they're going to need help. And they're going to need help in a way that doesn't make them feel less than. You know, we don't want everybody feeling like they're about to be boarded on the little yellow bus. That is like such a hard thing for children to go through. It's hard for children to be pulled out of a class by a resource teacher. All of those things are things that break down children's social fabric and can really cause some emotional harm. So I think it's going to be imperative that we really look at our children and our friends' children. You know, when we get back to school, that's checking in, trying to build that village back up, make it larger, set up, you know, if you have the opportunity to volunteer to help run after school tutoring to help get these kids back on their feet, do it at your home if you can do that. You know, really looking at who got lost in this shuffle, because I know we lost a fair amount of people, and it's something we can't ignore. And then we also get to teach our children that if so-and-so friend is not doing so well in class, you know, not looking at him as, you know, oh, he's stupid, looking at him as, wow, he must really be struggling. How can we help him? How, you know, you like math. Let's invite him over and talk about, you know, math and maybe shoot some hoops and have a pizza. You know, let's bring that village aspect back into how we reframe our community, because we are going to need to really support each other in this next process.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. How about you, Tanya? Any ideas on that?
Yeah, I am a strong believer of a transition plan, and that is, you know, just making a very intentional plan on what the next steps are going to look like. I do it for myself, and you know, I encourage other parents to do the same. And children have ideas of what they would like to see happen next. They have very, very distinct ideas of what they would like to see happen next. And so, you know, it's good to have that conversation of, okay, so school's gonna, and start the conversation now. School's happening in August, September. What do we want the summer to look like? You know, what do you want your first day of school to look like? You know, what kind of help do you think we're going to need, especially if you are the child that had to share a device with your sibling? So you probably only went to school, you may have only taken 1 or 2 classes a day, you know, sometimes not even that much, depending on the schedule. And so, you know, making learning fun. I think that's also super important, that everything is a learning experience. When you cook together, that's a learning experience. There's math in that, there's science in that. There's, you know, putting puzzles together, playing games, and, you know, making music. All of that is an opportunity for learning and helping our children to get ready, to get into that mindset of, okay, I'm going back to class, having those opportunities, maybe as things open up a little more, having more socializing, you know, at the playground. Those are the things that you can do to really help the children get ready, you know, and be intentional about making a plan. Make sure the kids know this is the plan, and this is your plan. It's not my plan. It's your plan. This is what you say you need in order to be successful. And yeah, I think that would help quite a bit.
Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate it. And all of these thoughts and suggestions and ideas are great. Reframe, transition plan, and it takes a village. So if you don't walk away with anything else, walk away with that. Know that we have one more series that's going to be taking place next week. Supervisor Keith Carson's office and Shahida is going to talk about, you've done a phenomenal job. So I'm going to turn it back over to you for the sake of staying on time. Thank you, everyone. I think you guys did great. I hope people took some real practical stuff that you can walk away with and try it out tomorrow. We're all in this together. Remember that. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to give the panelists any final thoughts, and then after that, I will tell you guys about the panel next week, which is our final panel on the Black African American Mental Health Series. Any final thoughts, panelists?
Just one that, Shahida, I did send to you a list of resources if families are feeling concerned about their mental health of their child or adolescent. There's a list of resources that they can access, and hopefully it'll be available on the webinar and the post information for folks. We have a lot of good access for children from the First Five, Help Me Grow, the Family Education Resource Center. We have 4 NAMI chapters in Alameda County. We have a number of really good organizations that are here that can help if you're really concerned and need an advocate to help you learn the ropes.
There was a question in the chat that I can, as my last thought, I guess, there was a question about how do you help your teen that is having some emotional challenges, but they're not wanting to get help. This is a time where talking to your teen about what they want to do with their lives. I used to leave teen appropriate material laying around the house, because if I approached my son directly, the answer was going to always be no. I didn't care, no matter how good the idea was, the answer was going to be no. But if I left teen appropriate information around about emotional health and maybe a program that's happening in the community that I thought would be helpful for him, I would just leave things, flyers just laying around the house, and eventually he would get interested and wonder, what is this? What is this about? And then again, talking about what their goals are in life, especially for teenagers, because sometimes helping them to accomplish their goal is helping them to get emotionally healthy. And that's an easy conversation to have.
Yeah, just really quickly, another resource is the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, ACAP. And they have on their website, if you go to aacap.org, they have a tab called Facts for Families. And they really break down all these different labels and issues. It's issue-based, disorder-based, but largely issue-based. And the issues apply to kids and adolescents. And it's broken down in simple language. It's just really, really helpful. So ACAP, Facts for Families. And then there was a question about young adolescents and racial trauma and its impact. Sadly enough, I think in the setting of COVID and then the racial reckoning in America that, marginalized people have always been fully aware of, but with the advent of smartphones, now the whole world knows what time it is. I think we've over identified and kind of over cheerleaded this trauma, right? So let's talk about in our history, folks who kind of fought back and who pushed back. Because, I was born in 71, and so I missed the 60s, but here it is, right? And so let's teach our youngsters, we were never victims, right? Our freedoms and our liberties were never given to us. We've always fought for those, and we were the leadership. Other groups, I just learned that there was a famous diner in Philadelphia, in South Philly, where all the stadiums are, where there was in the late 60s, there was an LGBTQ sit-in that they patterned after the sit-ins in the South. And they did it, and these were largely white folks in Philly. So let's talk about that, okay? We were never given anything in this country, okay? And so let's teach our young people about what we did to get to where we are now. And, and then just remind our youngsters of how charismatic we are, right? This swag that everyone's talking about, come on, you know where that came from. The people who we had our charisma and we had our creativity, right? We shared that with the world. We didn't even ask you to pay for it. So let's teach our kids about that, right? So that's what I want to leave us with.
I have to say I was around for the 60s, and one of the things I was able to share with my grandchildren was how to be at a protest safely, having a meetup point, having a water bottle in case you ended up with something sprayed in your eyes, and also how to make a really good picket sign with a staple gun. So we had a day that we just worked on stuff like that, and off we all went, and they were able to share that with other people. So I think it's important that if our children want to be active in the community, that we join them and we support them.
Thank you, everyone. Next week, we'll have a lovely panel where we'll talk about older adults or seniors and ways that we can support them in their mental health needs or their mental unwellness or wellness. I hear that older adults are panning way better in the pandemic because they like to be alone. So thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing you next week, 5 o'clock, same place. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent job, panelists.